Welcome back to Switched to Linux. I feel like I'm in retro mode here, and I did a lot of interesting research today. I listened to a few podcasts and I pondered a few things, and man, I feel like we got a good video. Maybe an old throwback to the old classics. I need to do way more like this. But what I want to talk about today is I do have something to hide. And the idea here is that people always say, we fall under a few different categories. As you're talking to people, one form of waving the white flag is to sit down and say, there is no privacy on the internet. And when you think there is no privacy on the internet, there's nothing you can do to stop data tracking, and so you just basically give up. And that's a really, really wrong approach, because there is things that you are hiding. And things you should hide. I go back to that old Billy Joel song, "The Stranger," right? We all have a face that we hide away forever. We take them out and show ourselves when everyone has gone. And not to say that we are hiding things intentionally or maliciously. There's just parts of ourselves that are always private. There's parts of ourselves that we do not give to the world. We are not an open book. If we were, we would have no friends because we would say everything on our mind at all times. We would hurt those closest to us. Indeed, we do have things to hide. Additionally, we have to stop and think that turnkey government, this is the thing Edward Snowden talks about quite frequently. And even if you trust your government today, can you trust them tomorrow? If you voted for Joe Biden, do you still trust him after that speech the other day that has been compared to every fascist dictator, the forming of the emperor, the empire in Star Wars, the chancellor on V for Vendetta, all sorts of weird. I mean, that was a creepy speech. The optics, the words, a deunifying country. And I am not a Republican. I want you guys to know. I am completely independent. I take various views on various different sides. But the reality is, if the government shifts and my thinking is illegal, I do have something to hide. Your faith and your belief. I am a part of the Christian faith, and that is a highly persecuted faith. And if people decide that they want to hunt you down because of your faith in God, then the apps and things that we're going to talk about here today are indeed part of that. We have to recognize all of these differences, all of these changes inside of our world that cause us to have something to hide. Now, that's that people that say there is no privacy on the internet. The other side of the people say, well, I have nothing to hide. I hear this all the time. I have nothing to hide. That is the part of the argument that is slowly starting to erode away. Now, I have been covering lately several of these articles on the Weekly News Roundup, and I realize not everybody watches the Weekly News Roundup. So I thought it'd be really good to just kind of talk about these today. This is just one of several articles we've covered on the Weekly News Roundup. What happened is, in the wake of the Roe versus Wade decision in the Supreme Court, now, let me get slightly political just for a brief moment. People on the right tend, generalities, to say, leave me alone, let me do my thing. People on the left generally tend to want the whole world to completely agree and confirm what they are doing. Those are generalities. Obviously, there's going to be people on each end of the spectrum, but in general, that's what you get. Now, what happens is people on the left tend to do a lot more confession through projection. In their mind, because they would spend 8 hours digging through every tweet that you've ever done to find the one example of stupidity that you have had and use this to crucify you, even if that happened 8 years ago. And they've done this numerous times. Okay. Now, that being said, people on the right in general, don't tend to do that. They don't care. Okay, they don't care about gay marriage. They don't tend to care about all the trans stuff, as long as it's not thrown entirely their way. But because people on the left tend to be that vindictive, They think the world is that vindictive against them. And so in light of the Roe versus Wade decision, what has happened is a whole lot of people are now looking at this going, you mean an app could track your location? They could tell if you've been to an abortion clinic. They could tell if you've been to a drop box for an election. They could tell if you've been here, there, or whatever. And so it's caused this giant uproar in the app world, primarily focusing around period tracking apps for some reason. And basically, this article here, which we covered on the Weekly News Roundup, was Mozilla analyzed several different period and pregnancy tracking apps and determined that the vast majority of them were privacy nightmares. And so there's been a resurgence of people wanting to delete these apps off of their phones, stop using them, and start looking because they were, oh, wait. You mean somebody could go in there and buy all the data that I have been for the last 5 years? Yep. Which includes figuring out where you live. There's we covered it last week. There's an FTC lawsuit against one of the data brokers because they were literally selling so much data. You could completely de-anonymize individual people down to their individual houses. You could find out where they lived. You could map their houses. In fact, one of the services they were selling was a plan to map somebody's house. And so we are starting to realize that we do indeed have things to hide. And as we have things to hide, we have to stop and recognize that we need to take things back. So the people who say there's nothing we can do, there is no privacy on the internet, you're wrong. Because privacy itself is not a single point in time. It is an ongoing evolution. It is a constant looking and tracking the things that you're doing, and you can take active steps to prevent a lot of this. Now, what got me thinking about this is this week's episode of Viva Barnes Law. And this streamed on YouTube last night as I'm recording this, September 4th. And they're talking about a number of different things. If you've not seen Viva Frei or Frei Barnes Law, very, very good, very insightful things. And I pulled out a few minutes of clips just to give you guys an idea of where privacy is at in light of government corruption. So this first clip is talking about, it's going to talk about the Fourth Amendment.
But what took place here is a classic Fourth Amendment violation. That's what this is. The search and seizure of information about an individual without probable cause. It's a Fourth Amendment violation of reasonable expectation of privacy, etc.
The judge acknowledges that they lacked probable cause for at least two, and I forget what the problem was with all four. So she admitted. It's admitted. The question is now, Robert, motivated reasoning being what it is, how's she going to get out of it?
Yeah, and what she does is she says FICE is an exception.
So, okay, so this is the case that they're looking at is a person who was tracked, and what is alleged is that the government bought a bunch of information about them, used this information, and they said, oh, no, it was a confidential informant. And this is the type of thing that is happening more and more and more and more is we're getting to the points where the data is being used. Now, we're going to skip a little bit. These are like 2.5 hour streams. I'd encourage you to go and watch the stream. I'll go ahead and link this one down below. And fun trivia, Viva Frei is exactly the same age that I am. I think I'm like 2 months older. So if you know how old he is, you now know how old I am. I've never divulged my actual age. So you can scour through those and figure out exactly how old I am. All right. So here is the next part. Now, this is regarding an EFF report, which I've not gotten a chance to read yet, and it's actually on my note to read it. But this is about a minute clip talking about a recent EFF report.
Report this week unmasked that all that geolocation information is actually being used by local police forces all across the entire country to map out your entire life. And that's because people didn't appreciate or understand how apps really work.
Okay, so let me clarify this before we get in here. And we don't want to, run afoul of fair use on two lawyers. Anyway, but the apps, when you're building an app, Okay. And this is some insight these guys can't tell you. When you're building an app, an iPhone app is built on Ruby, an Android app is built on Java. Not JavaScript, Java. Now, each of these have application packages, basically giant blobs. So you don't have to do this, this. You just say, I want to do this function, and you simply click, and it's going to import everything into your app, and boom, feeds back into the sensors, and now you have it. So it's simply the click of a button to get all of the location and tracking data in, and nearly every app on your phone can very easily do this without you even knowing about it. And we're going to get into solutions to this in a bit. But let's finish up this little bit of a clip.
And why they're free.
Okay, Robert, I'm not as familiar with this one as I should be, but please do carry on.
Just explain to people. Explain to people how an app is actually free.
Well, I think we all know the old paradigm. If it's free, you are the product. We've seen, by the way, we saw it's, I know more than I'm pretending. In the entire MO of 2000 Mules and how they went about documenting it was they bought data from cell phones because all of these apps track real-time user data, movement, geolocation to a box, no pun intended. And that's marketable information.
So he's talking about the documentary 2000 Mules mapped a series of different people to individual drop boxes throughout the most secure election in the history of the universe. And as they did that, they bought the geolocation data, and then they followed these IMEI numbers, which is tied to that. Now, of course, this is de-anonymized data, of course. But if you follow the data, and you can see point to 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 point, and you track it down to certain security cameras, and some of them are available online, on live feeds. Some of them have archives you can get to. Some of them you can figure out where they are based on, every single night the phone is sitting at one place and not moving between these 8 hours. Logic says that's where the person lives. Very simple reverse search. And that is exactly how that documentary went about tracking down all of the various informations. And so what they're doing here is he's talking about the fact that people are now realizing that documentary was built with the data. They're realizing that the documentary was able to demask individual people, and anybody, the government, individual people, organizations, can go ahead and buy that data. Now, the next part he's talking about, I think I've cut off the first 3 seconds of this clip, but this is about a program called Fog Reveal.
Though it's a variation of what Carter Page experienced. But what is that local police forces are using the information from the gatherer. Something, what was it called? Yeah, Fog Reveal. That's apparently the licensor. So what happens is you get your app, the app tracks you, the app then sells your personal information by tracking your geolocation to another data vendor. That data vendor in turn sells it to someone else. It goes up usually the food chain. They then do algorithmic data, utilizing the whole tracking of every place you went and what's affiliated with it, using mapping and other information that's out there, kind of like 2000 Mules did, but for very different purposes.
All right, so this is exactly how these things work, and it's surprisingly easy to get that type of data. It's not highly regulated. In fact, it is in United States, it is a complete Wild West of information about what you can do with the data. And this is why we're starting to see a few lawsuits. We're starting to see people raise awareness of the apps. And this is all a really good thing. And I did not include the note about what this last one was, but it was notable enough to watch. So we'll watch the last approximately 45 seconds here.
This is a real life, your phone, your tablet is a real life GPS tracker on your body that goes everywhere that phone or tablet goes. And they're aggregating that data in live time. And so now what's interesting is the U.S. Supreme Court has twice, first in the GPS tracker context, said that's a Fourth Amendment violation to do that without a warrant. Seeking cell phone records at cell towers, they've also said is a Fourth Amendment.
Let me go ahead and answer that question. It's on the screen right there. Can you geolocate a late 90s flip phone? You cannot geolocate it, but you can't even get them to work on towers anymore. Actually, a friend of mine still is, but it's scheduled to come offline with those things. You cannot geolocate it, but what you can do is you can cellular locate it. So there's two different forms of location data. One is utilizing the geocentric satellites, and the other is triangulating off the cell phone connections. So you actually can, off the 90s flip phones, they don't have the GPS in them, but they do triangulate the cell phones.
Violation in the Carpenter case when it was explicitly for the purpose of geolocation. So how are these local police forces trying to circumvent that? Well, mostly probably by trying to keep it secret that this is what they do. And how they do that? They'll disguise the source of their investigation, just as they did.
All right, so here they're talking, that last clip is that they did not have to get us all chipped. They just had to get us all addicted to smartphones. So we just carry these things around with us. We download every app that comes across, and we turn everything on at all times. We're going to get into all of this. But these guys here, they're really breaking down some of the privacy factors involved in some of the lawsuits and how police are using the things and simply disguising the data they know as confidential informants without much more. So I'll leave these guys here, and we'll move on to what can we do about this and a little bit more technical details about how it works. Of course, this is episode 127. On Viva Frei's channel. He is on YouTube, Rumble, and BitChute at least, possibly some others. And vivabarneslaw.locals.com is where you can find more information on them, including some things that they keep off of YouTube because it's ever slightly too spicy. But that's all they had to say about that. What I wanted to do is talk next about how this type of data is collected and what we can do about it. So there's basically three primary means that your phone is going to collect your data. The first is, and the most important, is apps that collect location data. So you go in, you have your location turned on your phone, and if you pull this guy down, you can see do I have location? I have a location tab over here, which is never turned on. And that location tab there that's never turned on, that one there, I only explicitly grant a few apps permissions, primarily actually just my maps, because I use offline maps. If I get lost in the woods or something, I turn it on so I know where I'm at. But for the most part, I keep that off. But apps with geolocation. The next is utilizing IP addresses, which gets you more of a rough area, a city-wide area, maybe at least a county-wide area connected to websites, basic things like that. That's also the type of tracking that is also applicable to a computer. So that is the type of thing. And then the third is the cell towers. This is where there was a case must have been about 3 years ago now, I think. It was a ways back. I think 2018, I think it was, where anybody could go in and buy any amount of that cell phone data that they wanted. Basically the geo, not the geo data, but the cell phone triangulation data. And they were tracking individuals down within like 5 feet utilizing this data, caused a giant lawsuit, and then a lot of that stuff was taken offline. So those are the three primary ways that a phone can track you. So if you do think you have something to hide, and hint, that is everybody, what can you do about it? Well, here's the basic steps that you can do. The first and easiest step is to leave your location services turned off. Now, there are a few rare exceptions you might want this on, but for the most part, your location service should always remain off. Now, if you're like, well, I need to find out where my kid is, or my spouse is, whatever else, there are other better ways to do that don't involve utilizing the app. And I'm not prepared to tell you all those different ways, but the problem with using the cell phone to do that is that everything has access to that data. and that can be problematic. Now, Android and iPhone have done better over the years of toggling locations on and off for different things, in theory giving permissions, but it's not entirely true. This is that lawsuit we covered on the Weekly News Roundup a couple weeks ago, where Google had to pay a fine to Australia because people thought they were opted out to location, and they still were not opted out to location data. So they were still able to get information even without explicitly giving Google that permission. And so turning off location services is the best thing to do. The next thing is, do not download any app that is not explicitly needed. Okay, do not download any app that's like, oh, it's the app for McDonald's or something. Why? If you really need another menu or something, go to mcdonalds.com on a web browser without any access to such things. I'll give you a couple hints on this one. Firefox Focus, Firefox Clar, and DuckDuckGo browser and Brave browser. These browsers, actually, I don't think Brave is, but the other three I mentioned, they are explicitly compiled without any access to microphones, cameras, or GPS. Okay, and so if you need a web browser that you're confident is not harvesting the data, because remember we talked about the apps are written with the packages and you just drop the packages in. Well, the standard Firefox browser and most other browsers, they have all these packages built in. Why? Well, you might need to get on your web browser and do a Zoom call or something, and that needs access to your camera and your microphone, whatever else. Great. Awesome. You might need to, scan a QR code and figure out when the bus is showing up based on your location data. Fine, whatever. But that's built into all the basic apps. You can have those apps for those times you need those functions. However, for your basic web browsing, you should use something that does not even have the capability of connecting to the cameras, the microphones, or the location data. Okay, so leaving location off, downloading only very explicit apps. Now, the only way you are getting around cell towers is by using a burner phone that is not tied to you. This means that it needs to be a burner phone. You're paying for it with cash. You're not setting it up anywhere near your place of residence. You're keeping it off and Faraday caged before entering your private residence, or anytime you're not explicitly using it would be a better thing, because you don't want to have location data everywhere, all else, and a black box right where you live in the map. Okay, fairly obvious. Now, not every jurisdiction has the ability to do that, but at least here in the United States, we still can. We can go into Walmart, we can go into Best Buy, we can go into Target or CVS or Walgreens. We can drop cash, buy a SIM card, buy a phone, not connected to anything but the dollar bills we used. We can go somewhere else, we can set it up. We can do all of these types of things and keep it off. But then you have to make sure you're not using this to sign into any account which is explicitly tied to you. These are things, and those strategies are overkill for most people. But I would say for most people, for your average person, you're not going to do a burner phone. The first easiest step, turn off location services and revoke permissions of location for everything that does not explicitly need it. I realize there's people out there with jobs that have to have it. I think you have to have location services turned on to do like Uber and stuff like that. And I think you need, I know, in fact, if you're setting up certain Garmin's, not my Garmin, not mine, but certain Garmin watches, you have to have geolocation turned on. You have to have a full email address tied to it, a phone number. It's baloney. I was going to set one of those up for a friend of mine. We put the thing back in the package and took it back to the store. Said, nope, not doing it. But leaving location data off and only downloading apps that you 100% explicitly need, because people are going without computers to have phones instead because they're so convenient. But this phone is a giant privacy nightmare, and you do have things to hide. If not now, then the data that is collected and stored and harvested and analyzed and cataloged about you may be something you want to hide from in the future. I would rather not give them all that data up front. And hopefully these guys here at Viva Barnes Law were able to give you a few insights into this to say, maybe we shouldn't have all this data because even the government and police are using it to take nabs on you and then backtrack who you are in the event you become a person of interest, whatever. But anyway, we're going to leave this one here for now. Head on over to the website, switchedtolinux.com. We have some resources over there. And, of course, we have Patreon, Subscribe Star if you want to help support the channel. Or you can, of course, leave a tip over here on YouTube. We also do stream to 5 different channels. When we go live on a stream, those are linked at switchedtolinux.com as well. And the videos are cross-posted: YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey. So you can catch the show on all those different places. With that being said, thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.